the Indus was part of Indians' lives until 1947. The very name of India comes from the river. The ancient Sanskrit speakers called the Indus Sindhu. The Persians changed the name to Hindu, and the Greeks dropped the H altogether. Chinese whispers created the Indus and its cognates, India, Hindu, Indies. From the time that Alexander the Great's historians wrote about the Indus Valley, spinning exotic tales of indomitable Indica, India and its river tantalized the Western imagination. Hundreds of years later, when India was divided, it might have been logical for the new Muslim state in the Indus Valley to take the name India, or even Hindustan, as the valley was called by an 18th century English sailor. But Muhammad Ali Jinnah rejected the colonial appellation and chose the pious neologism Pakistan, land of the pure, instead. He assumed that his co-equals in Delhi would do the same, calling their country by the ancient Sanskrit title Bharat. When they did not, Jinnah was reported to be furious. He felt that by continuing to use the British name, India had appropriated the past. Pakistan, by contrast, looked as if it had been sliced off and thrown out. During the 2 years that I lived in Delhi, I wondered about these things, the ironies, misnomers, and reverberations of history. But perhaps to my sun-baked imagination, it was the river itself that was the most enticing. I dreamt about that river, which begins in Tibet and ends near Karachi in the shimmer of the Arabian Sea. I tried to picture those waters, which emperors had built forts beside, which poets still sang of, the turbulent gold-bearing abode of snake goddesses. When at last I reached Pakistan, it was to map these layers of history and their impress on modern society. During the past 60, well, this book was published in 2008, I think, so it's almost 10 years ago. Maybe this is still true, you can fill me in. Pakistanis have been brutalized by the violence of military dictatorships, enraged or deceived by the state's manipulation of religion, and are now being terrorized by the West's war on terror. But Pakistan is more than the sum of its generals and jihadis. The Indus Valley has a continuous history of political, religious, and literary ferment, stretching back thousands of years, a history which Pakistanis share with Tibetans and Indians. The intertwining of those chronicles, memories and myths, that is the inheritance of the people who live in the Indus Valley. This book recounts a journey along the Indus, upstream and back in time, from the sea to the source, from the moment that Pakistan first came into being in Karachi, to the time millions of years ago in Tibet, when the river itself was born. Along the way, the river has had more names than its people have had dictators. In Sindh, it is called Purali, meaning capricious, an apt description of a river which wanders freely across the land, creating cities and destroying them. Sindhis also know it as Samunda, ocean, a name evocative of the vastness of the river within their landscape and civilization. For Pashtuns on the frontier with Afghanistan, the Indus is simultaneously Nilab, blue water, Sher Darya, the Lion River, and Abasin, father of rivers. Along its upper reaches, these names are repeated by people speaking different languages and practicing different religions. Baltis once called the Indus Gemtsu, the Great Flood, or Sufo, the Male River. Here, as in Ladakh and Tibet, it is known as Senghe Sampo, the Lion River. Today, in spite of the militarized borders that divide the river's people from each other, the ancient interconnectedness of the Indus still prevails. The river gave logic to my explorations. It lies at the heart of this book because it runs through the lives of its people like a charm. From the deserts of Sindh to the mountains of Tibet, the Indus is worshipped by peasants and honoured by poets. More than priests or politicians, it is the Indus they revere. And yet it is a diminished river. The mighty Indus of Sanskrit hymns and colonial tracts was heavily dammed during the 20th century, beginning with Britain's profit-driven colonization of the lower Indus Valley and extending through 70 years of army-dominated rule in Pakistan. Big dams have shackled the river, transforming the lives of human and non-human species on its banks and in its waters. Now, when I think of the Indus, I remember the eulogies of Sanskrit priests, Greek soldiers, and Sufi saints. Their words come down to us across the centuries, warning of all there is to lose. So it's really wonderful to be here because it's been a long time, and one of the best times of my life was when I was travelling in Sindh and researching this book. And I made so many friends and was treated so with such hospitality by the people I met in Sindh. And really, I felt that Sindh went against the current of Pakistan. I was always being surprised in Sindh by things that were going on, by the things people said. It was, I think was then a place that defied the norms that were being created by Pakistani society in many ways. And I don't know whether you would like to ask some questions. Yes.
If anybody have questions, please.
My name is Omar. There's one question. This is one fantastic book. My name is Umar. Okay now? Yeah. There's one question. No? Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah. You want to hear? It's about the global warming, which is, you described fantastically about the Indus Valley civilization, the whole process all the way through. Now, we, being a Sindhi, we are suffering a lot about the global warming issues as well as you must have as well. Now, what are the causes? Is it because of less flow from the Indus River, passing the Kotli barrage all the way through to the sea? Or is something to do with the drainage water, or some chemicals, things from the factories and all those things? What implications, what do you think of future of this Indus Delta all the way through? So there are need to know, honestly.
These are big questions, and I imagine the people who are living. Are you working in Pakistan?
No, I work in
So we could open up the question, I think, because there are going to be people who know about the contemporary situation much better than I do. But it's all those things. I think.
But did you find any kind of signs which would you because you see you start from journey from all the way through, and then you end up to the sea. The weather flow goes there in the sea. Did you find any difference? Something which you think, my goodness, there's something wrong here.
So one of the things the book does is it looks at the effect of the British who dammed the river. They saw the water that flowed out to sea as a waste, and they wanted to cut off the river and use up every drop of water. They didn't really understand the delta as an ecosystem or as a place where people lived as a culture.
Yeah.
And chapter 2 of the book is about that. What happens when people make those decisions and they effectively consign an ecosystem and a culture to the bin because it doesn't suit them in terms of the way that the country was being run by the British. And I think, as far as I understand, the government of Pakistan has followed that dictate and continues to do so. Sakya has a question, I think,
okay.
from behind.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Marvelous reading. I enjoy every bit of it. Obviously, I've read the whole book and referred it to many of my friends. But I actually found from what I liked about the book is really the way you kind of, in a very nice way, critique the biases we also carry within ourselves. So obviously you loved Sindh, you saw the hospitality and generosity of Sindh, but then you also talk about how we discriminate Shidis or toilet workers or Christians or some biases we have against women and Hindus, which are realities. And I want to understand how this contradiction you saw and how nicely you portrayed it. I would like to comment some on that.
Okay. This is a reference to, I think the book begins in Karachi, and I was looking at how the land of the pure, a crisis which erupted when the Hindus, most of the Hindus wanted to leave India, but the state encouraged the low caste, the Bungis, to stay, and because it was felt that Muslims couldn't clean toilets, couldn't clean sewers, and therefore an underclass was needed to do this work. And it was really a contradiction a contradiction which went to the heart really of what Pakistan meant. Was it for Muslims or was it for all the people who lived in the Indus Valley? What did this country mean? And I think maybe it's something that was very difficult to resolve and still is not yet resolved. And along with that dilemma was a very big question of skin colour, which you see in essence in the treatment of the Shidi people, who I remember going to see a politician, a Sindhi politician, and I said to him, I went to stay on his farm, and it was very clear, you know, he had a big pond of water, and that was for his house, and then there was a pond of water for the people who lived in the entire village. So things were very stark in terms of money. But he said to me, "Where are you going next?" And I said, "I'm going to see the Shidi. I'm going to see the Young Shidi Welfare Organisation. They live in Badin." And he'd never heard of the Shidis. It never occurred to him that these people would have their own organisation. And he asked me how many there were. He was thinking of votes. The Shidis consider themselves to be the original Muslims because they, Bilal was honoured by the Prophet and called the first prayer. They consider their history to go right back to the beginning of Islam. But as you will know, they're very much looked down upon still in Pakistan and tend to still live in the places where their ancestors came and worked as labourers and are still doing labouring kind of work. So there clearly hasn't been very much social progress. And then you refer to women, the treatment of women. All these things really, these troubling issues were there throughout my book, but the thing that I was always cheered by in Sindh was that there were these places in society where these things could be overcome, and often it was at the Urs of Shah Abdul Latif or some of these amazing parties that happened along the banks of the Indus, when you would have women dancing and the Shidis were there with their Mugaman drum, people of different castes, different religions, and I hope that current in society is still there in Sindh. I would be devastated to discover, going back 10 years later, that society has become dominated by the much more hardline religious Wahhabist tendencies that were being promoted while I was in Pakistan. I hope nobody's going to tell me that things have changed that much in years.
Hello, Alice. One more question. It's a nice, lovely book. I wanted to know that how the other audience, apart from subcontinent people, South Asian people, how they perceive your book.
Well, firstly, to begin with the subcontinent, India, because it very much cheered me that when I went to India, people loved this book. They were so lonely, I think, from Pakistan, so missing their neighbours. And obviously there's curiosity as well, but I think there's also a sense that Indians don't really know that much about Pakistan. In Pakistan, when I was there, everybody was watching cable TV and Bollywood, and Pakistanis maybe knew much more about India than Indians knew about Pakistanis. So it was really nice to go around India and have people ask these questions. There was always a family story. Somebody had emigrated. Somebody had a cousin in Karachi. You know, all these kind of things. So the book was published in America, and I went on a tour in America. It was published in French and in Italian. It won a prize in Italian. It won a prize in French. Published in Dutch, in Bulgarian.
In Sindhi.
In Sindhi. Yes, so it's been widely published and translated. Yeah.
I think there's one final question he has one.
Yeah. So one quick comment, one question. The quick comment, like the brutalities in Pakistan, they are same, maybe worse than 10 years before, the one you were talking, unfortunately. The second, like, my question is, I looked at, like, you have a new book, like, on the table over there.
Yes.
So can you like, if you have time,
Yes.
talk about that book, please?
So my second book is a novel, and it grew out at the time when I lived in Delhi. And it always used to surprise me when I was in Delhi. That I lived there during the rule of the BJP, and it was a terrible time. Thank God I'm not living there now. I think it's, it was awful political party, and they preached a lot of hatred and ignorance, fundamentalist Hindus. They wanted to rewrite history. They wanted to disprove various things that had been proved by historians. And so the novel is a reaction to that. It describes that time when I was living in Delhi, which was around the time that I had the idea to write this book, so 2000, 2001, 1999 to 2001. And it's narrated partly by Ganesh, the elephant-headed god Ganesh, who is always said in the story of the Mahabharata, the great epic of India, that he was chosen to write down the epic by Vyasa, the author. And in my novel, he wants to write his own counter-epic. He thinks that the story hasn't been fairly told, and so he takes it upon himself to write his own epic. And that story is kind of playfully, but also faithfully told in my novel. But it's also about these big questions of fundamentalism. I think really I was more shocked living in India, I think, than I was in Pakistan. Pakistan had this terrible reputation everywhere around the world for being fundamentalist, but India, no one talked about India, and India it was awful what was being done in the name of religion in India. So these two books are really twins. There's the non-fiction book about the river, and then there's the novel about the Sanskrit epic and about the Indian capital.
Thank you. Copies of books are there if you guys want to buy.
Thank you very much, Alice, for your great book and showing the real face of Sindh, which was lost somewhere under the name of Pakistan. Thank you very much. A great applause for her, please. I would request Adi J. Lohana to come and present her the Ajrak. Thank you. I would like Riaz Fahel, a renowned journalist from Pakistan for BBC, to come on the stage, please. Now I would like to request Mr. Tom Deegan, Asian Affairs journalist from United Kingdom, to share his thoughts.
I am the features editor of Asian Affairs magazine. Yes, can you hear me?
We turn on.
Yes, I'm the editor of Asian Affairs magazine, and just to let you know that on the table over you there is a copy of this month's issue of the magazine, which also covers the recent Geneva demonstrations by the Sindhi and Baluchi people who protested at the United Nations, before the United Nations building in Geneva a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, they are there available for you to take as you need. My discourse is principally concerned with as Alice has just said, the purpose of the Pakistani state. She referred to it, what was its purpose? And I believe that its purpose was nothing more, nothing less than simply to divide what the West saw as a very, very powerful possible rival arising in the East. When the decision to ultimately grant independence to the Indian subcontinent was made, it occurred immediately after the Second World War, and it was overseen by Earl Mountbatten of Burma, who was given the commission of handling the independence handover by Clement Attlee's government, post-war government in Britain. Clement Attlee wanted a united India. Mountbatten persuaded him that Mr. Jinnah would start a civil war in India if he didn't get a separate state for Muslims. Mountbatten persuaded Attlee that that was the case. In reality, it was nonsense. Jinnah was not as influential with the Muslim population of India as a whole as Mountbatten was claiming. The decision to divide India was made by Winston Churchill and Harry Truman at the end of the Second World War, shortly after Churchill made his famous Iron Curtain speech. Their eye was on the Soviet Union. Everything, all of their foreign policies and their decisions after the Second World War were directed to A, starting the Cold War, and B, to making sure that India was not so close to the Soviet Union that it might be more heavily influenced. They were concerned that there were many socialists, communists, and left-wing people in the Quit India movement, and they wanted to make sure that India was therefore divided. The two-nation theory didn't make any sense, simply because it left more Muslims, excuse me, it left more Muslims outside Pakistan than were incorporated into this new state. So just on that basis, it couldn't possibly have been a need for Muslims to have an independent state outside India, because the remainder of the population of the Muslim population of India outnumbered those inside Pakistan. The consequences of that have already been felt around the whole continent. The consequences of this unnecessary division, because the Pakistan state that came to exist, Jinnah had his ideals. He was quite probably sincere in his belief that the country could evolve into a representative democracy. But as we know from the history, the only thing the Pakistani people have actually gotten since independence predominantly is military dictatorship, one military dictatorship after another. And it is a military dictatorship that has proved itself to be extremely vicious whenever their interests are threatened. They are a very wealthy elite of Punjabi, mostly Punjabi military figures, who I understand from Geneva, some of the guys from Geneva during the recent protests, that they are worth $30 billion between the Pakistani military. If you compare that with the Indian military, they are, most of them have to go on book signing sessions around the world to try and supplement their meager Indian pensions. That alone indicates the nature of the Pakistani military setup. They are in fact little more than gangsters. And they are also vicious gangsters. Anybody who threatens their power, I don't have to tell you the activities of the ISI. They can murder people with impunity. They torture and murder people, dump them on the streets, and then if there is an outcry, if the family create any kind of difficulties or attempt to look for legal recourse, the ISI simply pay the family a few hundred or a few $1,000s, and thereby, according to it is a apparent that Muslim law, that absolves the crime, and therefore there is no further investigation of that murder. So that means that basically the ISI have a free hand to take people who are dissidents from wherever their religion or whatever part of the country they come from, to torture and murder them and dump them. No other country in the world tolerates or permits such activities by military or by any institution. The Nazis did it in Germany, and perhaps Stalin did it in Russia, but no civilized country today tolerates such activity. Pakistan does and continues to. The two-nation theory was forwarded principally because of the opposition of a great Sindhi leader called Allah Books,